There is only one living God, and He is the reason for all the beauty in this broken world. Even though I'm the most broken person that I've ever known in my life, God saved me. Today, I'm going to share the story of how Jesus saved my life and why He's Lord of my life. Hey friends, and welcome back to another episode of Called and Unqualified, a Create, Worship, Inspire video series. So if you don't know me already, my name is Brenna, and I'm unqualified to be a spiritual or theological expert of any kind, but I am a little more qualified to talk about this topic since it is a personal story of mine. And I'm probably going to watch this back in a couple years or a couple months and be like, she had no idea what she was talking about, because stuff has been happening so fast. But that is a part that makes me unqualified. I've actually rewritten this outline for this video more times than I'm willing to admit because I think we really tend to miss the point of testimonies. Our testimonies are supposed to be stories about how God saved and transformed a broken human into a vessel that lives for Him. More often though, I feel like some Christians have this pressure to feel like they have this huge testimony, but it's not a sob story, it's not a therapy session, and it's definitely not just a long list of sins that you've committed. Because we have prayer for that, and God already knows those things. Instead, our testimonies are supposed to be a way that we can share the story of God's grace and how it transformed our lives so it can inspire others that are still searching for Him. So my story doesn't actually even start with me, it starts with my family. For years, I've been saying that I was born to a lukewarm Christian and a headstrong atheist. My dad grew up in a Baptist household, but his faith really wasn't his own until after my mom came to Christ. Now, I feel like I get some of my stubbornness from my mom, a lot of stubbornness from my mom. She was the one that was really fired up and really just couldn't fight anymore when God actually showed her the truth. So shortly after I was born, my mom came to know Jesus, and then my sister was born, so we kind of grew in our faith together. My dad is the sweetest and one of the most gentle men that I've ever met in my life, and he definitely shaped the way that I see God. So I grew up really knowing that God was patient, loving, and full of grace. I also couldn't have asked for a better mom. My mom came from a lot of brokenness and hardship in her childhood, and God completely changed her life, and that changed mine. My mom taught me forgiveness, compassion, love, and how to persevere. She worked with individuals that had special needs while I was growing up, and so this just helped me understand that even though we're different, God loves all of us, and we should show the same level of compassion and empathy for everybody that are made in God's image. And since I mentioned that my parents were pretty new to their faith too, we went to church almost every Sunday, and they were very involved in ministry. I was actually baptized around 9 years old, and a part of the baptism class that I had to take before I made that commitment to my church and to Jesus in front of my church was sharing our testimonies. And I was a little young, so I didn't entirely understand why some adults, when sharing their stories, got so emotional. This sounds like the setup for an amazing childhood, and I can honestly tell you I couldn't have asked for a better family, but I did a lot of stupid stuff. Everything that went wrong after that was entirely a decision that I made. So even though things kind of looked perfect from the outside looking in, there were some complications that did happen. I was born 6 weeks early, and so it's honestly a miracle, and that's a huge part of my testimony that I'm even still alive. But for some reason, I've just grown up with this mystery illness. For some reason, I could never really keep up with the kids. Sports were really hard. I'd get bruised really easily. Fatigue was a huge thing growing up, and I was always in some kind of pain. But the benefit to this is I really knew that I couldn't do anything on my own, so I had to rely on someone. So not very different from many kids growing up, I too was a little shy, and very insecure. I also in middle school kind of stopped eating. I ate a little bit, but I was really underweight. My parents were both very loving and an example, but right before I started middle school, we actually found out that they were going to be separated and divorced from each other. And the good thing that God did through all of this was I grew really close to my sister, and then my mom met an amazing man who's now my stepdad, and we're super close with all three of our parents. I really wanted to be loved, and I kind of felt overlooked. So I kind of went searching. I did go searching for attention in the worst places. But this was also paired with my feeling that I needed to be a servant to all, and that was my way of loving people. So in this way, I didn't really choose my friends chose me, and I attracted a lot of really hurting people. I went to a pretty rough middle school, and in my middle school, my friends were doing drugs, sleeping around, who knows what, pretty much everything. I had one friend who was addicted to reading horror stories before bed and couldn't sleep for weeks. Like, really weird stuff was happening. Luckily, I never participated in any of that, but I came really close at times. And so God ended up saving me from that environment and moving me into a private Christian school. So I was surrounded by people who claimed to be Christians, and that sounds good at first, except for it was such a small school. I was in a graduating class of 8, so we spent a lot of time together. I was in high school with the same people that I was in 8th grade with. So this means you kind of become like a family. You see the good, the bad, and the ugly, from not just the students, but from the teachers too, because they're human. So I very evidently saw that people are broken. So based on the way that I saw a lot of my spiritual leaders in my life living, I started to question if God was really real. But another thing that I had to do in the school was actually take an apologetics class. So learn why we believe what we believe. And my teachers always pushed us. They wanted us to look into things for ourselves rather than being told what to believe. So I ended up having to study the logical arguments that actually factually back up the Bible and that Jesus was a real man and rose from the dead. And there was way too much evidence for me to actually doubt that God was real. But now I was starting to learn that God just wasn't loving and gracious, but God was actually a God of justice. And the more broken I felt, the more terrified I got. Because I didn't really have a personal relationship with God, I just knew a lot about him. I was still involved in a lot of broken things and living in sin even though I was going to this high school. So it was really hard to hear from God, so I had this empty space that needed to be filled. So again, I went searching for attention in all of the wrong places. And spiritual warfare got very real. So during junior year, I was in a relationship with one of the guys in my class at my high school. And we were both really young and dumb. And he was pretty abrasive. So he was very controlling, but I let him. He started comparing me to a lot of the other girls that we knew personally and people that were like celebrities that we didn't even know. And this really started to get under my skin. He started to push my physical boundaries that I've been really clear about, and he wouldn't take no for an answer. So this was pretty much my first physically and emotionally abusive relationship. But I kept living in it because I thought that this was what love was. He started to try to convince me at age 16 or 17 that I shouldn't go into college because he didn't want to wait for me. He tried to get me to be a stay-at-home mom and pretty much tell me where I could live and what car I could drive. He also told me that I shouldn't really go into law because if I can't advocate for myself, then how can I advocate for other people? The beginning of our senior year, he left to go to a different school, and so our relationship fell apart and I finally felt free again. This is where I should have gone to God for healing, but a new temptation crept in. Around this time, the Me Too movement was getting really big. So from my perspective and influence of the culture that I was living in, I was told everything that had happened in my past relationship had nothing to do with me. I was a victim and all men are bad. But what happens if I don't take personal responsibility? It happened again. The next guy we'll just call Josh because I have a suspicion that he still watches these videos. What's up? Josh was really socially awkward, and even in our small school, he didn't really fit in. And so I was drawn to people like this because that was my friend group and that was me too. He and I got really close and we started to study together. And then after a while, he started saying that he wanted to keep me more accountable for my work. He started to push boundaries until he had control of everything. He started to tell me that he needed the email password so he could check my grades, to see that I wasn't being distracted during class by talking to different people, and he also needed to be able to get into my phone. And when we weren't at school, he needed to know where I was at all times when he texted me so he knew that I wasn't dead. He would pressure me into telling him what kind of sin that I was dealing with, only to tell me that I was a broken human. But I knew that already. I felt a lot of shame that had happened from my past relationship that I didn't realize that he was doing the same thing. He eventually had control over my entire life. We're talking, he would message my family as me, and I would have no idea about it. But I let him, because whenever I resisted, he would always say, "Don't you trust me? What have I done to make you not trust me?" Then he started inviting me to group hangouts. But when I got there, no one else but him showed up. He started to first physically take advantage of me after he emotionally took advantage of me, like what had happened in my past relationship. But the thing that kind of escalated and got worse was he was a lot more forceful and would shame me and tell me that it was my fault. I pretty much came home with bruises and went to school with bruises pretty frequently, and no one had any idea that this was going on. And then I realized the pattern. I was drawn to hurting people because I wanted to be their savior, but I never could save them. And this is because I am not God. And the more that I lay my life down trying to fill people up without having a relationship with Jesus, it's just going to end up not working for anyone involved. I have no power on my own. It is only my job to introduce people to Jesus, but I cannot save them. So because of all of this, and because Josh had convinced me that all men were evil except for him, I didn't want to move away for college. I wanted to commute from home. God actually ended up calling me into a university that was a little too far to commute my freshman year. So I started to pray over my roommate. When we first started texting each other, Autumn and I really clicked. But there was one night when she texted me and said, "Hey, I have a bunch of friends on a group text that I send Bible verses to every night. Do you want to be a part of it?" God gave me one of the only other Jesus followers on our whole campus to be my roommate. Autumn and I actually ended up going into ministry together our freshman year, and she's one of my best friends for life. She is also the one that kept me fun and made sure that I didn't spend all of my weekends studying. God has used Autumn in my life to teach me how to be brave and courageous even when it's difficult, how to love fiercely, and be loyal even when things get really tough. And one of the reasons why I prayed for a roommate that I could go into ministry with or just bring to Jesus, period, was because so many people that graduated from my high school knew about God, but they didn't know God. So they walked away from their faith within their first month of college. So the first week that I had of college class was with one of my professors who was a French physicist, and she and I didn't really agree on anything. So we had this book that was written by someone that walked away from his faith because he took every opportunity that he could to pretty much invalidate the Bible, and it didn't work. But she told us to go home, find something in the chapter that we had to read, and either support it or refute it. So this is how, in my first week of college class, I brought my Bible into class. I would consider that first week to be the really first time where I put effort into my relationship with Jesus, and no one else was holding me accountable for it, really. So my freshman year was pretty great. I felt independent. Jesus was one of my first priorities. I was making a lot of new friends and communities. But the more I distanced myself from Josh, the more I started to hear from God. So I ended up not including Josh as a part of my life anymore. Even though I was never really able to shake Josh, because the next relationship I was in, Josh was texting that guy, and then when that guy blocked him, he started texting that guy's family. And then I started to hear more clearly from God for a while. The next relationship that I was in was pretty dysfunctional for many reasons. I was just learning to trust men again, so I ended up being attracted to a guy who wasn't entirely a man yet, wasn't really able to stand on his own. I also viewed myself as a victim, but because I was in a relationship with someone that wasn't as spiritually strong as I was, I tried to dumb myself down to fit in this box. The culture that I was living in, especially on my college campus, was telling me that I had the right to live my life as a victim. But this isn't the gospel. That isn't being saved or being freed. So throughout high school and early college, spiritual warfare I felt very severely, and I started to become restless. I noticed that there was something really wrong that only a few people in my life understood. I've never been able to sleep very well in my life. My heart would race. I'd be out of breath all the time. and just my mind couldn't stop moving. I'd start shaking and I wouldn't be able to feel anything, and eventually I felt like I just went numb. No matter how drained I felt like I was not being a good Christian unless I was serving and constantly working. I also felt like a fake Christian when I was telling all of my friends about how Jesus could save them from their hardship by not making it go away, but by offering a way to feel peace, a way to understand that God has already won in the end. And I felt like a fake Christian by feeling whatever inner turmoil was happening and then preaching this. The restlessness started to slow down into this heavy weight where I felt like I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move, and I couldn't think. I just felt empty all the time. And then quarantine hit. For the first few months of 2020 and the last few months of 2019, I felt those feelings that are supposed to go away in high school. After being unwise with my community in high school and really surrounding myself with people that were reminding me of how broken I was and that I wasn't worth saving, it really started to get to me. Things ended up hurting so bad in high school that I just wanted all of the feelings to stop. Though I never really tried anything, I really didn't want to live anymore. And the only thing that really kept me alive was knowing that God was real and knowing that the pain that I feel now would not go away with death. That death was only going to mean separation eternally from God if it happened on my terms. The fact that I knew that the suffering on this earth wasn't anything compared to the suffering that I was going to deal with if I left, it wasn't worth it. But this did cause more panic and restlessness because there wasn't a way out. These feelings came back in 2020, and I had some poor friends that were really trying to help, and I was terrified about opening up to them because I didn't want to put that emotional burden on them like others had put on me. It's exhausting feeling like you have to save somebody else's life, like one wrong word or one wrong move and you're the reason. So I started to push away a lot of my friends and some of my family because I didn't want them to see me like this. I was so frustrated because college was good, my family life was good, I had amazing friends, I knew where God was calling me. I had a wonderful church family. There was no reason for me to be sad. I thought I had all I wanted, but all I felt like was a victim. I felt empty, and this wasn't what was the answer. I needed to let this all go. I really wanted to get some answers. So in the beginning of 2020, the end of my sophomore year of college, I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, a depression disorder, OCD, and just recently, an autoimmune illness that causes chronic fatigue and chronic pain. The thing was, I just assumed that this was all normal. My last dysfunctional relationship ended, and then suddenly I had a bunch of anxiety that just was lifted. God had to rip things from my hands for me to understand. And He revealed to me that because I am the way I am, just how important my faith is to me and my relationship with Him and serving, I'm going to have to be with a very spiritually strong man who loves Him more than me, and who has a big heart for service and loving people. And now we get to the real point. Maybe you're like me, and the thing that you've dealt the most with in life is seeing that after the stupid, repetitive decisions that happen, you are a broken human being, just like I am one of the most broken human beings. Your worth isn't through what you do, it's through your identity through Jesus, and that's something that I really needed to understand. We actually don't earn salvation through what we do, we earn it through grace. And it's so we can't be tempted that we were saved by anything other than God's grace. So while healing, there was something that I had a really hard time reconciling, and it's that God should have left me. If I'm so broken, I can't be a leader. But through this whole time, there's been a really common theme popping up for me spiritually. Because God doesn't use qualified people. If He uses qualified people, then there's a temptation for us to feel like it's the person's doing and not God. The more broken a vessel is, the more the light can shine through all of the broken parts. Everything that I've tried, and believe me, I've tried over and over again to do by myself, falls apart. But everything that God takes control of just ends up lining up. So you remember how I said that I really struggled with confidence and body issues growing up? I didn't like the sound of my voice. I don't like seeing photos of myself. And then God called me into this ministry. When I was locked in the house in quarantine, I had to find other ways to reach people. God has called me to love on people and to encourage them. And I honestly feel like through this platform, it's a very healthy boundary. And I've been seeing more and more from people. There's this balance that we need to find. There's people that say that God is a God of truth and justice. So we need to fight all of the things that aren't true, which is true. And other people that say God is a God of gentleness, love, and grace. So we shouldn't tell people that they're wrong. But people need to be saved. So God is all of these things. God is God. You need the truth that can be hard to hear sometimes, but it needs to be presented in a way that is loving and gentle and humble. When God led me to this ministry, I feel like I finally found this safe place with healthy boundaries where I can actually reach and love on people. The depression, anxiety, and the OCD took a back seat, and God took control of my life. And this happened right during the beginning of lockdown, right when everyone else's anxiety and depression started to spike. And then it all made sense to me. God lets us go through hardship to, of course, bring us closer to Him, but also to prepare us on how to build skills by leaning into His truth to support each other that are still searching for Jesus. God had been preparing me in empathy for His people, not just to prove that He can use one of the most broken humans ever, but also I have such a better understanding after living through that of how to support people that have literally hit emotional rock bottom. I can't put into words really how much of a 180-degree turn it was. I would barely wake up in the mornings and feel empty and terrified and scared and not want to wake up. And now it's just joy. Like, I just want to love on people and encourage them and share this grace and peace with them. But guys, it is not a result of anything that I have ever done. Suicide is not the answer, self-harm is not the answer, and self-pity is definitely not the answer. These aren't going to bring you joy, but having a really solid relationship with this God that loves you so much, and then going and serving and loving others, that is what is going to bring us hope and peace. And this is what inspires joy. And so that's why one of my favorite verses is 2 Corinthians 12:9. This is where Paul was talking about his own brokenness. And God said to him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." In many parts of my life, I should not be alive anymore, but God saved me. And it became very apparent why. Is because God uses unqualified people to make His power shine all the more brighter. Because if I was of fantastic health and confidence, you would be very tempted to praise me instead of God. But instead, God has blessed me with hardship so I can lean in closer to Him and stay humble. I get to be reminded that it is my job to love Him so much that I love His people. And while I don't want to idolize service again, if God asked me to surrender this platform and this ministry, I would in a heartbeat. But while He's given me this platform to love, encourage, and help others through difficult times and share His love and truth, I will absolutely do that for as long as I can. And I couldn't be more happy or full of joy. Okay guys, so that's it for today's episode. Just as a reminder, all of these episodes, our link for our Patreon, and merch orders are all available at createworshipinspire.com. Please be sure to comment down below with either your favorite verse or something that God has done in your life recently that you want to share with others. Also, please be sure to leave any suggestions that you have for future episodes. Please be sure to like this video, share with a friend, and subscribe if you haven't already. And you can follow our Create Worship Inspire Instagram, Facebook, Twitter pages, and I also just made a Discord. So in case we get censored on any of these platforms, we'll all have a place to go hang out. And you can go find the link for that Discord on our Instagram page, I believe, but I'll also leave it down below in the description. See you next time!